If you're listening closely, you saw Josh laid out very clearly for us what the heart of the gospel was for Paul and why it is that he would be motivated to do something crazy like be willing to suffer and die. And you wouldn't just be willing to suffer and die in the midst of people who loved you that were begging you to stay unless there was something far more precious and far more valuable to you. For him, he says over and over again throughout his epistles, his letters to the other churches in the New Testament, he makes it clear that to live for him was Christ, to die was gain. Because he says it's much better by far to depart and be with Jesus. But for your sake, he says, I stay here so that I can continue to tell others about him. And he writes things like that Jesus died for us and he rose again for us so that we who live would no longer continue just to live for ourselves, but to live for the one who did those things. There's something that can happen, though, at this point where we can all read these texts together and say, I believe that. Jesus died for me so that I should live for him. I believe that. We could put that on an inspirational poster, a card, something like that. Keep it in your office, in your home. Put it on the wall and completely miss the point. Some of us miss the point in this way. We misunderstand the type of life that Jesus intends for us to live. So we say, Jesus died for me so that I'll live for him. And what we think that means, what we then begin to look at, the kind of life, what kind of life should I live then? Because Jesus died for me. What kind of life should I live? And the answer that maybe some of us think is, well, I'm supposed to be a good moral person. That the reason that Jesus died for me so that I would live for him is the kind of life I'm now supposed to live. I'm just supposed to keep my nose clean. I'm supposed to not do the bad stuff that we all know is bad, right? So I shouldn't get drunk anymore. And I probably shouldn't be addicted to things. And I probably shouldn't do drugs. And I shouldn't cuss. And I shouldn't be mean to people. I should just keep my nose clean, be respectable, and be a good moral person. That was the point of it all. That Jesus died for me so that I would be a good moral person. Some of us think that. But you won't get that idea from the New Testament. At least not if you're reading the whole thing and actually taking it for what it says. But some of us don't think that. Some of us think something a little different. We say, yeah, Jesus died for me so that I would live for him. And the kind of life he wants me to live is that I'm supposed to be a good citizen. This is kind of like the American dream Christianity. I'm supposed to become self-sustaining. That the reason that Jesus died for me is so that I wouldn't have to need anything from anybody else anymore. I would just become sort of a self-sustaining, self-made man or woman. And that I could go and get the house that I want. I can take care of my kids. I'll be a good family man. And I will be a good citizen. I'll vote the right way. I'll live the right way. People will know me and respect me because of how I love my family. I'll be a good citizen, self-sustaining. But that's what Jesus did. He came to die to make good citizens who live the American dream. Some of us think this. This is why we come to church every Sunday. Because we're trying to get more tips on how we can live the American dream. Get a bigger house. Be good to our kids. That's the point of it all. But that's not the point of it all according to the New Testament, not according to Jesus. Some of us, it's a third way. Maybe we think Jesus died for us so that we will live for him. And then instead of thinking of it in terms of what we've just talked about, we think of it in terms of something maybe a little bit more true. Like Jesus died for us so that we would love and serve other people, so that we would worship him, so that we would tell others about him, all the things that Paul was doing in this text. You say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing by itself, except for this. The other way to get it wrong, just as Josh pointed out for us this morning, is even if we understand the type of life that Jesus intends for us to live, we can still misunderstand the reason why he wants us to live that way. You follow what I'm saying? That you could get, in theory, okay, well, why did Jesus die for me so that I would live for him? What kind of life is it that he intends for me to live? He tells us. And then we go on and misunderstand the reason why we're even able to live that way. So some of us hear that text and we get busy trying to do this stuff in our own strength. We say, that's right, Jesus did all that for me, so I'm going to go do a bunch of stuff for him. Almost like we're trying to pay him back. I want you to think for a second how deeply offensive that would be to God. Think on that for a moment. When's the last time you received a gift from someone and immediately after they gave it to you, you said, thanks for your generosity, I'm going to pay you back for this. You know that because if you've been on the other end of it where you've given someone a gift out of love for that person and the first thing they say back to you is, how can I pay you back? They missed the whole point of the gift, didn't they? The reason that you gave it to them was not because you were hoping for them to pay you back, but rather it was because of the love that you had for that person in the first place. Some of you offend God every day because you try to live a life that you think will pay him back. Here you go, God. Here's my little offering. And Paul read from Philippians 3. Do you know what Paul says our offerings to God look like? A pile of deuce is actually what it says in the Greek. It's a stronger word than that, but I'd get in trouble if I said it from the stage. All right? It's a pile of stinking feces, is what he says. This is what it looks like when you say, God, I'm so thankful for what you did for me. I'm going to pay it back to you. He says, I don't want your feces. Thanks. Actually, that wasn't the reason I gave it to you. And this is what we do. Some of us also miss the point. So we say, okay, I understand the kind of life I'm called to live. And then we get about thinking, yes, but the way I'm able to do it is of my own strength and power. And if I don't do it, God's not going to love me and accept me. So instead of the payback mentality, this is more the fear-driven mentality. The thought that, if I stop going to church, if I stop loving my neighbor, if I stop serving people, if I stop worshiping Jesus, if I stop telling others about him, eventually I'll get to this point. I'm not sure where it is, but somewhere out there I'll cross the line. And God will look at me and say, sorry, you didn't live a good enough life. That was the whole reason I died for you, so that you would live for me, and you didn't do it. Therefore, you're cast out into the utter darkness. Except that's not what Jesus says either, right? And so we look at that and we say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, again, that's also deeply offensive to God. That he would say, I actually died to rescue you from sin and death, and now you feel like you actually have to rescue yourself. How crazy is that? And yet we do it. We constantly feel these tugs in our hearts to draw us back into these false ways of thinking. That maybe if I just mess up one too many times, God will look at me and say, sorry, you didn't do good enough. You understand how unbelievably freeing it is to realize that the love of God actually looked down on people who were at the time his enemies, me and you, who were going completely in the wrong direction. And he says, I'm going to love them in spite of the fact that they're running the wrong direction. And more than that, he says, I'm going to actually love them enough to pull them back out of that. See, don't miss this. When Paul says Jesus died for you so that you would live for him, he never for a moment meant for you to think that is something you're able to do on your own, in your own power, in your own strength. That's why immediately after that verse, he goes on to say, it's only because you've died in Christ that he's making you a new creation. It's only because he went to the cross for you and became sin for you that you can become righteousness in him. He says in Colossians 3, I want you to put off all the old stuff, your old ways of practices, put to death what is earthly in you. He says, the only way you're able to do that? Because you've already died, past tense, in Christ, and you've already been raised in him. Therefore, he says, become who you are. Become who you are. You're people who've died with Christ and been risen with him, and you're united to him in faith, died with him, you've been risen with him, been raised with him. He says, be who you are. And who are we? Because we're people who have the Spirit of God in us. People who have had sin and the old self crucified with Christ and now are able to actually put that stuff to death through the power of the Spirit. We're people who have actually been called to live for Jesus, yes, but also because he is alive in us through the power of his Spirit. People who are united with him in every way so that God looks on us and has nothing but love for us. Not because we earn it from him and not because we have. And so there's no more fear, it says in Romans 8. There's no more condemnation if you're in Jesus. This is amazing news. Now, don't miss this. That doesn't change the kind of life that we're called to live. It just changes the way that we try to live it. You see that? Jesus, after all, did say, come and follow me and die to yourself. The kind of life that he calls us to live is a difficult one. Just as Paul's going off to his eventual death in this passage, Jesus says, come and follow me and die to yourself. It's tough. That kind of suffering is not easy. And yet, because of Jesus, it's not only possible, it actually is transmuted into some kind of otherworldly glory. The kind of thing that only makes sense for people who really believe that they've already in Christ been accepted by God because of what he's done and now therefore are set free to live for him because of him, through him, with him, for him. It's amazing. But I hope every week that is clear to us, that every week we leave here, yes, filled with hope and longing for the day when one day we don't have to fight the battles that we fight against sin anymore. Yes, filled with the desire to do better than we're doing now, but never with the thought that we need to do that or else God won't love us. or that we must do that because we've got to pay him back. Instead, I hope that every week it is, why in the world would I do other than live for the one who died for me? And because of him, that's actually possible.